Now, let's discuss the dialectic method of Socrates. The difference between the dialectic method of Socrates and Hegel is, for Hegel, it's evident that there are three stages. You have your thesis, you have your antithesis, and then you have your synthesis. Whereas for Socrates' dialectic method starts with questions. The keyword for the dialectic method of Socrates, again, nandun yung dialectic, the dialogue, meaning to say, it involves two particular individuals. One who offers the questions and one who is supposed to answer the questions. In this learning process, according to Socrates, you don't give students the direct answer to a specific problem. Meaning to say, for Socrates, it's necessary for the dialectic method to work, it's necessary for the instructor to offer questions first. So, ibig sabihin, you try to help students see that there is never one correct answer. Kasi ang ginagawa ng instructor dito, the instructor try to lead or facilitate the learning process. The instructor tries to lead the learner towards the appropriate answer. So, nandun yung cross-examination, the keyword, and then it's also considered as the art of conversation. Hindi lang malinaw dito yung three stages. Pero, it's similar. Kasi if you're going to impose a question, andito yung question mo, if you're going to impose a question to the learner would try to create their own answer. And then after creating, the learner tries to create their own answer. Ang gagawin naman ng instructor is to oppose, it would try to question the answer made by the learner. So andun ulit yung question hanggang sa marating nila yung answer na pwede silang mag-settle. So it's still a process. The difference between Socrates and then Hegel, for Hegel, it's a thought process. You have your three stages, the thesis, antithesis, and then the synthesis. For Socrates, there's still the art of conversation, may dialogue pa rin. Pero the learning process starts with the question. Hindi sagot ang ibibigay, tanong ka agad. After ng student masagot yung question, merong supporting question na ibibigay ulit yung instructor. Hanggang sa marating nila yung appropriate answer na kung saan pwede silang mag-gain ng knowledge, settled knowledge, and then settled wisdom. Settled truth. Ando na yung settled truth. Sample questions as stated here, what made you say that X is valid? If X is valid, ito yung supporting question. If X is valid, why does Y contest it? So, andun yung patuloy. It's a continuous process of filtering. That's the keyword. Filtering the answer made by the learner para ma-filter din yung question, maging specific and particular din yung question na gagawin ng instructor. Can you clarify your response about X? What makes X more useful than Y? So, pwedeng inductive method, pwede ring deductive method. That's the difference between the dialectic method of Socrates and then Hegel. The next philosophical method used is analytic method. I've mentioned this a lot of times in my previous slides. Ang keyword lang natin for analytic method is we try to make complicated ideas into simpler ideas. So in other words, we try to separate. There's a process of abstraction. We try to break up abstract or complicated ideas. We try to separate the whole from its part. Ang ginagawa natin is there is a method of discovery kasi we are able to separate the particular from the whole. We were able to separate the complicated idea from the simpler idea. Analysis starts with what we have to find out, traces the connection between it and data. There's a process from the unknown to the known. And then from conclusion to hypothesis. Example, the idea of God as a whole, and then we have properties of God here that would define the idea of God as a whole. For instance, how do we define God? We can define God as an omniscient being. Omniscient ibig sabihin all-knowing, unchangeable. Omnipotent means powerful. Omnipresent meaning to say present at all time, present from the past, present and future. Ibig sabihin, human time does not apply in God. God is eternal and independent, loving, truthful, etc., etc. So these are parts which comprise the totality of God. The totality, ibig sabihin yung kabuuan ng Diyos. So if I'm going to separate this one, andito na. May analytic method kasi I'm able to attribute these parts. Itong mga parts na to. I'm able to separate these parts dito sa totality ni God. Now, if I'm going to employ analytic method, ibig sabihin there must be a procedure from the unknown towards the known. So, kunin natin ngayon yung omnipotent. Omnipotent, for instance. If God is powerful, ibig sabihin, God can do everything. He can do everything including, for instance, yung problem that we tackled under theodicy, which pertains to the evil. If God is powerful, dapat natalo niya na yung kasamaan. I was able to analyze that because I'm able to separate the part from the totality of God. So meron akong nalaman ngayon. If God is powerful, so ibig sabihin God is able to defeat evil. Pero ang problema, God is outside, omnipresent. God is outside human time. Ang problema sa human time, we have the past, we have the future. Kay God, omnipresent lahat yan. Walang human past, walang human future. So if I'm going to assume that God cannot, it's very impossible. It seems that God is not powerful because God cannot totally eliminate evil. It's like I'm putting God, nire-reduce ko ang pagkatao, ang totality ng Diyos sa human time. Which opposes sa isa sa mga attribute ni God na omnipresent. So this is how we analyze a specific problem. We try to break up, separate the parts from its whole so that from the unknown, makakamove tayo sa unknown. Ito yung method of discovery na sinasabi natin sa analytic method. So from again, ang keyword natin from analytic method may breaking up. We separate the whole from its parts. Ang next method is the romanticism. Ang romanticism nangyari during the 1780 to 1880s. Nandito na ang reason why it became prominent during this time is because of the arts. Romanticism is a movement that emphasizes feeling and emotion over reasoning. So ibig sabihin nito, instead of entertaining your analytic method, you'd rather give in to the dictates of your emotions. An example of these are the movies that you're watching and then yung mga vlogs na kung saan nagkikater sila sa number of viewerships. Ang appeal nila parati is appeal to the emotion. Kasi ang appeal to the emotion would deal with the number of viewers. Wala silang pakialam kung if they're reasoning correctly or if they're after the truth or if they're after the reality. Ang importante sa kanila is for them to acquire the emotions of the public. For instance, this movie, 10 Things I Hate About You. This girl, yung character here, hated this guy so much. Now, if you hated this guy so much because of some unwanted events that this guy did to you, yung sabihin na nating nakalagay dito, I hate how you left me without any sign. I hate that you move on without saying goodbye. I hate how your smile makes me give in. I hate that you're always making me want to caress your Siguro nakalagay dito, Lips, I hate how you can talk to me when she's around. I hate that when she leaves, you look me up and down. I hate how you made a mark in my heart. I hate that you let us drift apart. So, ibig sabihin, naghiwalay sila. I hate how when I say I hate you, I don't really mean it. But most of all, I hate how you know I can't hate you. So, I hate it. Naiinis siya na hindi naman pala siya naiinis. And never will. So, this is more on emotions. And then, another example here is yung situation nitong mga vloggers na to. Si Badger tapos itong babae na pinakasalan niya. So, nagpakasal sila pero tong lalaki was caught by his wife cheating ng babae kahit nakasal sila. Ang move na ginawa ng wife is to temporarily separate herself from this guy. Pero dahil nga vlogger sila, they're always after the viewership and emotions ng viewers, pinagbigyan niya ng second chance although hindi naman apparent, malinaw na nagkabalikan sila pero andun pa rin yung communication nila. So isipin nyo, if you're going to use your reason, alam mong tama pa ba ang ginagawa mo, hindi mo na i-consider to kung tama pa ba ang ginagawa mo or in line with reality. Ang mahalaga sa'yo, yung emotions mo. So this is an example of romanticism. You'd rather go with your give into your emotions kahit na alam mong mali. Kasi ito yung sinasabi ng emotions mo rather than discover the correctness or truthfulness of reasoning. That's romanticism. Bitin ko, for romanticism, you'd rather give into your emotions kahit na alam mong mali. Kasi ang reasoning, binibigay sa atin ng reasoning is the truth. Kahit na alam mong mali, basta natutuwa yung emotions mo, you'd rather give in there. That's romanticism. Next is synoptic. The keyword for synoptic is synopsis or overview. It's an overview of the whole. An example dito yung trailer ng movies. So sa trailer ng movies natin, kahit 2 minutes siya, alam natin yung story ng movie na ang movie usually lasts for 1.5 hours to 2 hours. Pero because of the synoptic trailer, we're able to view the totality of the movie. It's grasping anything in one comprehensive view. So one comprehensive view kasi mabilis lang yung trailer, 2 to 3 minutes. Minsan seconds to 1 minute lang. Another example is this method, an outline method. Outline method is used in your table of contents and then sa syllabus. So ang syllabus natin, ang course natin would last for 14 weeks kasama na yung exam. So imagine ganun katagal yung isang term, 14 weeks. Pero because of the syllabus, 2 pages nakikita mo na yung overview ng 14 weeks into 2 to 3 pages. That's synoptic or synopsis. I think that's the last philosophical method used in philosophy. Now we go with logic. Again, ang sinabi ko kanina in one of the many branches discussed a while ago in my previous slide, in logic, logos is reasoning. Part ng reasoning ng logic is we analyze arguments. So arguments an argument is composed of a subject and then a predicate, which can be later translated into premise. So ibig sabihin sa argument meron tayong mga premises na may subject tsaka predicate. Yung premise na yun pwede ring maging conclusion na kung saan meron ding subject at tsaka predicate. So ibig sabihin we're talking about premises in an argument in order for us to recognize the truth. So there are 2 types of we try to make arguments in order to persuade or convince the public or convince the person who we're talking with or talking to. Rhetoric, when I say rhetoric, we study the effective of persuasion kahit na hindi siya embedded with the truth. Ang logic, we try to persuade and convince the public using proper arguments. Ito may arguments din naman ng rhetoric kasi Ang problema with the persuasion using the arguments on the rhetoric, it's not after the truth. Sa logic, in order for it to be legitimate, it has to be embedded under the truth. That's the difference between rhetoric and then logic. Ang rhetoric, kadalasan na ginagawa ng mga manliligaw, kadalasan na ginagawa ng mga kandidato. Tulad nung sinabi ni Duterte that he's going to cross the ocean, the sea, gamit yung jet ski, tapos dala-dala yung Philippine flag. That's rhetoric. Pero hindi naman kasi siya totoo kasi hindi niya pa ginagawa at hindi niya gagawin. That's rhetoric. So that's the difference between convincing, kaya mahirap magtiwala sa mga kandidato during campaign season. Kasi the arguments that they're using are just rhetorics. Now, under logic, the logic uses two common rules. The rule of syllogism and then the rule of inference. Now, let's discuss the difference between syllogism and then inference. Halos pares lang naman sila. But for syllogism, kunin natin yung keyword na interpolate or interpolation. There's a pattern. It's a method of reasoning by drawing a conclusion from two premises. So, ibig sabihin, meron tayong conclusion. Now, the reason why we are able to create a conclusion is because of the premises. Magkakonekta yung premises na ginawa mo, kaya ka nagkaroon ng conclusion. Yun yung pattern. Yun yung interpolation. Yun yung tinatawag na syllogism. The particular pattern of a syllogism is that first, major premise, meron kang major premise, and then yung major premise mo is still connected with your minor premise, which would lead to your conclusion. For example, ang major premise natin dito, only Greeks, kasi general siya. Only Greeks are brave. All Spartans are Greeks. All Spartans are Greeks. So therefore, yung conclusion natin na Spartans are brave has a pattern, has a connection from the previous premise premises that were made. Nagkaroon ng pattern, nagkaroon ng connection. Kasi hindi ka naman magkakaroon ng conclusion kung wala tong dalawang premises na ginawa mo. So, ang keyword po to easily understand syllogism is yung connectivity, yung connection, and pattern. Syllogism, siguro connection. Ang pwede kong ma-create na word. Yung connection ng conclusion mo verbatim, dun sa ginawa mong premise. So, how do we come up with this conclusion? It's syllogism and then inference. Pwedeng gawin natin, since present yung Greeks dito tsaka present yung Greeks dito, pwede natin siyang i-cancel out. So ang natitira na lang is Spartans and brave. The next rule that we must observe in an argument is the rule of inference. A while ago, I was able to discuss the rule of syllogism. Ang sinasabi natin for rule of syllogism, yung conclusion, nakuha natin yung conclusion because of the pattern and then connection of the premises, major and minor premise, they are interconnected. That's why we're able to acquire the conclusion. Kung ano yung present or constant variable which is present in your major and minor premise, yun yung pwede natin i-cancel out for us to have the subject and then predicate in the conclusion. That's your rule of syllogism. Next rule is the rule of inference. Hindi naman masyadong nagkakalayo ang definition or description of rule of inference from the rule of syllogism. Another nature of an argument is the inferential thinking. Inference, ibig sabihin, kailangan yan magkaroon parate ng conclusion at saka premise. Na kung saan yung conclusion ay may pinanggalingan. In other words, the conclusion was acquired because of the premises that were made. That's almost the same as your syllogism. Inferential, when you say inferential, it's the process of reasoning from a premise to a conclusion in which the conclusion is drawn from evidential reasoning. So, madaling salita, hindi nagkakalayo yung pagkakaparehas ng description ng syllogism at saka ng inference. So, example, ano ba ang nauna? Ang manok o ang itlog? Now, if I'm going to say that that the chicken goes first before the egg, there must be an inferential connection between my conclusion and then my premise. Between my major premise and then minor premise. For example, let's examine this slide. Alin ang nauna, the chicken or the egg? If I'm going to use an argument using a major premise, now the reason why the egg goes first is because there's an egg-laying species prototype of this chicken. So yung pinanggalingan ng egg na to, na kung saan nanggaling tong chicken na to, is because my major premise is I've included an egg-laying species prototype. So in other words, as a conclusion, as an inference, the reason why the chicken goes secondary is because nanggaling yung egg na to sa isang prototype na chicken. Kaya nauna yung egg, nagkaroon ng mutation, egg first, and then nanggaling ngayon yung chicken. Or another argument, pwede kong sabihin na nauna yung dalawang prototype chicken, nagkaroon ng zygote mutation for the egg. That's why we have your chicken. So this argument I can use to justify that the egg goes first before the chicken. So ang makikita natin dito is the interconnection. Hindi mo pwedeng masabi na nauna yung itlog without this major premise. Hindi mo pwedeng nasabing nauna tong itlog without this major premise. So, ibig sabihin, the reason why we have the conclusion that the chicken goes secondary is because of the inference that I made in my argument na egg, saan nanggaling yung egg dito sa prototype chicken na to. So, this is an example of an inference that I can use in an argument. Example, let's check the syllogism and then inference in this argument. Sabi, anything that moves, so anything that moves is moved by another. The ball moves. So ang conclusion natin dito is the ball is moved by another. So if I'm going to employ the rule of syllogism, tanggalin lang natin to. Ang matitira is this one. Anything that moves is moved by another. The ball moves. Kinancel natin to. Rule of syllogism. Ito yung connection. Rule of inference. The ball is moved by another. Style. So, ang inference natin here is discuss. Ang illustration natin for inference is like this. Sa premises natin, ito yung syllogism natin. Yung conclusion nagmula dito sa premises natin. Why? Because the premises is our claimed evidence. So what is claimed to follow from the evidence? Magkadugtong parati yung conclusion at saka yung premise. Yan yung component or part ng isang argument. So let us apply the rule of inference and then the rule of syllogism to determine the difference between formal and then material logic. For formal and then material logic, ang formal logic, ang keyword lang natin dito is yung tama. Yung Tagalog ng correctness here is the formal logic or yung argument under formal logic, it's after yung pagiging tama. Now, paano ba nagiging tamang isang argument? If it follows a specific rule. Anong rule that we're talking about here is the rule of inference and syllogism. Formal logic is after more on the correctness of an argument rather than the truth found in the argument, because what matters under formal logic, it's the premises and then the conclusion are following the rule of syllogism and then inference. It has to do with correctness or sequence or of the following rules. It's not after on the material. When I say material, it's the ability of the argument to reason truthfully. Ano bang ibig sabihin natin ng truthfully? It becomes truthful if it conforms with reality. When I say it conforms with reality, we can easily validate that the argument or the statements made in the premises can be validated in the reality. Pwede mong makita sa realidad, kaya siya material. Ibig sabihin, lahat ng argument, lahat ng premises na sinusunod under formal logic, hindi siya totally na sinusunod yung truthful found in reality, but yung pagiging tama ng rule na nakapaloob dun mismo sa inference and syllogism ng isang argument. So what matters under formal logic again is hindi importante kung totoo at nabavalidate mo sa reality conclusion. Ang importante, tama yung sinusunod na batas ng argument mo. Anong batas yun? Yung rule of syllogism and then inference. To reason correctly is not necessarily the same as to reason truthfully. Ito lang yung rule na sinusunod ng formal logic. What matters is my argument is reasoning correctly. Bigyan natin ng example. Okay, let's examine why this argument is under formal logic. So, practice makes perfect. Okay, is this an example of formal logic or material logic? When I say formal logic, may sinusunod na syllogism. Okay, tingnan natin. Practice makes perfect, but then nobody is perfect. So, eto, pwede mong makita to sa reality. Pero ang question here is your conclusion. So, what's the point of practicing? So, practice makes perfect. Nobody is perfect. So, ibig sabihin, there's no need for you to practice. Kasi nga, nobody is perfect. Okay, when we're going to discuss the conclusion here, so ibig sabihin nun, walang point yung pagpapractice mo kasi nga wala namang perfecto eh. Etong conclusion mo dito becomes questionable in reality kasi may mga tao na nagpa-practice para lalo pang gumaling kasi nga kaya mong i-validate sa reality to. Now, the reason why you have this conclusion is because it follows the rule of syllogism and then inference. Ang question, yung conclusion mo dito becomes correct pero not necessarily true kasi may mga tao pa rin na nagpa-practice kahit na sabihin mong nobody is perfect. Does this argument reason truthfully, materially? Yes, kasi may mga nagpa-practice pa rin sa reality eh. So objective world, you can validate that. Kahit na alam mong nobody is perfect. But still, this argument is still considered correct. Tama, kasi it follows a certain rule, certain syllogism, and the rule of inference. Kasi hindi mo makukuha tong conclusion na to kung hindi mo nabuo yung naunang premises. Next example tayo. Pag sumama ka sa matalino, tatalino ka rin. Pag sumama ka sa adik, magiging adik ka rin. So may cause and effect tayo. Sumama ka sa matalino, magiging matalino ka. Pag sumama ka sa adik, magiging adik ka rin. So yan yung inference. Cause and then effect. Yan yung syllogism. Meron kang major premise, meron kang minor premise. Tapos ang conclusion mo ngayon, dahil nga sinunod niya yung pattern meron dito, meron kang syllogism na pattern, yung interpolation, meron kang pattern na nakita dito, in-apply mo yung pattern na yun dito sa conclusion na to, which makes try mong sumama sa akin, magiging akin ka rin. The reason why this falls under formal logic kasi may sinunod siyang pattern na nakita dun sa previous premises. This is rule of syllogism, rule of inference. This is correct, pero not necessarily true. Kasi hindi ibig sabihin na sumama ka sa akin, magiging akin ka kaagad. Kaya mo siyang i-validate sa reality. Okay, again, tama yung argument, pero hindi siya necessarily totoo. Does this argument reason truthfully? Materially? Ang nire-reason niya lang yung pagiging correct kasi nga meron tayong tinatawag na rule of inference and rule of syllogism. So I live by syllogism. Example here, God is love, love is blind, Steve V. Wonder is blind, So kunin lang natin yung mga familiar variable if we're going to use syllogism. Andun yung love, andun yung love, andun yung blind, andun yung blind. Ang matitira na lang, Stevie Wonder is God. So therefore, Stevie Wonder is God. So under the rule of syllogism, this is correct. So this is formal logic. Pero it doesn't necessarily follow na makikita mo sa reality talaga, na ma-validate mo sa reality na si Stevie Wonder ay Diyos. Okay, again, this is correct but not necessarily true. Magiging true lang siya pag ma-validate mo sa reality. So it becomes material logic kung kaya mong i-validate sa reality. Okay, punta tayo sa material logic. Ang material logic is the opposite of formal logic. It concerns after the truth if kaya mo siyang i-validate sa reality. At kaya mong makonect yung mind mo sa real order na makikita mo sa reality. That's material logic. It also follows rule. Yung rule ng syllogism and then inference. Let's examine yung pagiging truth, ma-validate sa reality. Material means it's after the truth can be validated in the reality. A tree is a plant, Igorots are Filipinos. So reality, it's the quality of having tangible existence, not regulated by pretense. Tangible existence in the objective world. So Igorots, tunay na kaya nating i-validate sa realidad na ang Igorots are Filipinos. The sun revolves around the earth. The dog is an irrational animal. Flowers are petals. Pwede ba siya sa material logic? A triangle has 4 sides. So ang natitira dito, I think, is the last 2 statements. Kasi the dog is an irrational animal kasi hindi naman kaya ng dog na maggawa ng analysis and make an argument. Flowers or petals, this becomes under formal logic. A triangle has 4 sides, formal logic to. Itong 4, kaya mong i-validate sa reality, that's why it becomes material logic. So example ng material logic is this example. So the human soul is endowed with intellect and will. What is endowed with intellect and will is spiritual. Human soul, ibig sabihin, it's something not physical. So, ang intellect mo and will, not physical yan. Kasi it only exists in your mind. So, pag gusto ko, for example, kumain ng burger, without saying it to you, it's inside my mind. It's my will. So, it cannot be perceived by your own senses. That's why it's not physical. So, what is endowed with intellect and will, it's the opposite of physical, that's spiritual. So, gamitin lang din natin yung rule of syllogism. Ano yung present variable here in your first premise? Makikita mo rin siya dun sa second premise mo. So, ang matitira mong conclusion is the human soul here, first premise, and then yung premise mo, predicate mo dun sa second premise, which is spiritual. So, conclusion mo is the human soul is spiritual. So, you can validate this in reality kasi ang soul is not physical. So, kung hindi siya physical, obviously, it's spiritual. It's beyond the perception of your senses. So, last slide before you can proceed to your seat work. Ang sa seat work lang natin, you have to identify whether your conclusion is material or formal logic, valid or invalid argument. Dalawa lang yung ano natin dito, argument. It's either valid or invalid, pero under valid argument, it's subdivided into 3 classification. Meron tayong valid sound, valid and absurd, valid and unsound. So, tingnan lang natin dito yung true. It becomes valid kasi yung true dito stands for material logic. Yung F dito becomes valid pero follows a certain rule. This is formal logic. It's still correct kahit na absurd siya, kaya siya valid. Itong true, accidental to. Conclusion mo is still true, still material. Yung true mo dito, still material. Compared sa invalid argument, yung premises mo are material, pero yung conclusion mo nagiging formal. Kasi hindi mo na siya kayang i-validate sa reality. Yun yung pinagkaiba ng valid tsaka invalid arguments. Ulitin ko po. Ang valid arguments, may makikita tayo, dalawa siya, valid tsaka valid and sound. Makikita mo siya sa can be validated materially. Yung isa, yung conclusion mo is false, which stands for formal logic. Nagiging valid pa rin siya kasi it follows a certain rule, yung rule of syllogism. Kaya siya valid pa rin. Pero kaya siya absurd kasi false, you cannot validate that in reality. Sa invalid argument, meron kang premises that can be validated materially. Totoo. Pero the conclusion, hindi mo na siya kayang i-validate materially sa objective reality. Kaya siya nagiging false. Right? So, let's check. Don't forget to, let's check your seat work. Don't forget to follow the rule of syllogism. Pag sinabing natin, for example, A is B, tapos B is C, anong conclusion natin dito? What's our conclusion now? So, let's follow the rule of syllogism and then inference. So, A is B. If A is B and B is C, ang magiging sagot natin dito is what? Is A is C. Okay, now, I'm going to check your seat work. The seat work is about valid and invalid arguments, and then you have to determine whether the conclusion is material logic or formal logic. And then you have to create your own conclusion dyan sa seat work nyo. Alright? Again, thank you for listening. Next week will be our synchronous class.